behind, I'm going to detail the rest of my remarks and get right to the keynote. Paul Lightfoot, many of you will know, he is the CEO of Bright Farms. We had a little bit of pushback when we introduced Paul as the keynote, and that's really because, as he'll be the first to admit, he is not a horticulturalist. In fact, most of his background is in software. But Paul made a really smart observation about 4 or 5 years ago, I think now, Paul, 2011 he started the firm. What he noticed was that grocery stores can't always get the produce that they need year-round. And he came up with a very elegant solution, which is, how about we go to the grocery store and we say, you give us a 10-year contract and we will give you a dedicated hydroponic greenhouse that's local to you. That vision has now turned into a company that raised $4.3 million in funding from institutional investors that include the likes of NGen earlier this year, and which have won Paul a spot on the Fast Company's top 50 innovators. Paul has encouraged everyone to tweet questions to him and comment. Here's the Twitter handle here, it's IndoorAgCon. And without further ado, I think I'm going to hand over to Paul. Thank you.
Test. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah? Great. Has everybody had coffee that needed it? Let's see this one. Well, it's great to be here. I appreciate the opportunity. So many friendly faces here, and a lot of people I know and like, and a terrific energy in this room, even if we all didn't have our coffee. I believe that there is a food revolution underway right now, and I think this is a room full of revolutionaries. And I want to tell a little bit about my story, but also why I think it's a great time to be a revolutionary in this industry on these topics. As an introduction was made, which was by my mom told me, which I appreciate. I'm Paul Lightfoot, CEO of Bright Farms. We finance, build, and operate hydroponic greenhouse farms on behalf of supermarkets. We do it for a two-pronged purpose, I've got up here now, which is for the health of our planet and also for the health of our society. Let me just get a quick sense of who's in the room, and this is useful for everyone else as well. Raise your hand if you're from an organization that produces food. So maybe about half. Raise your hand if you're from an organization that distributes or sells food. Okay. And raise your hand if you sell something to one of those two groups. Okay. Who's left? Is there a lot of people left? And that's not part of the conference organization. Educator. Investor. Okay, so you sell something. Selling capital, right? Okay. So I'm gonna try to limit my prepared remarks to about 30 minutes, and I want to have a pretty robust Q&A session. If Kyle, are you in the room? Are you able to pull that Twitter feed up, IndoorAgCon, on the screen when we get to it? If that's possible, we're gonna make our list of questions from that. Actually, one more show of hands. Who can post a tweet from this room while we're talking? Not the song industry, not my rate. Let's scrap the Twitter idea, which is a little bit too cool. We're gonna have a show of hands for questions when we get to it. I encourage you to jot down your questions. I'd like to have some substantial, interesting, and even some difficult topics to talk about. I'm going to try to save at least 15 minutes of Q&A. So just jot down your questions as they occur to you, we'll get to them. Back on who you are. Who works for an organization with more than 5,000 people? Just a couple. More than 1,000. More than 100. Between 10 and 100. And less than 10. So this is a really skewed towards small organizations, which I like. It leads me to believe, maybe this is the natural liquor, that we have a lot of people that are startup organizations, probably a lot of ambition, and a lot of high growth organizations, which I think is perfect for what we've got here. As I get underway, I want to introduce one special person. My daughter, Amanda, just stand up for a second. My 8-year-old daughter is on her first business today. Does anyone else have school-age kids? Raise your hand. Yeah. Are they in school? My daughter's playing hooky today, so she will be here with me today. Which I appreciate. Thank you. Indoor agriculture is a pretty big and broad term. I've been studying the industry for several years now. I actually made the transition in 2010. I'm going to try to speak to all of you, but know that my lens is based on my experiences, which is based on the local food industry, on controlled environment agriculture, on the supermarket industry, providing through the supermarket industry, and on urban agriculture. So that's going to be the perspective that I'm talking about. I'm not going to be speaking about technology for growing. I do a lot of talking about that in my business, but I'm not an expert on that. I work with experts. I'm a business guy, so I'm going to be talking about market and product trends, which I think are awesome topics to talk about because of the opportunities that are out there. I'm happy to answer questions on any topic when we get to the questions I will. Here's a quick story of my journey to get where I am, just so you understand my perspective. But for most of my 30s, 44 now, I ran an enterprise software company that improved the supply chains of big retailers. It really was automating the distribution center operations. My singular focus was maximizing the efficiency of the systems that brought goods to stores. And it was a good career. I felt fine about it. On a personal basis, however, I've become throughout my 30s a zealot for local and non-processed whole foods, and became very vegetable-centric in the way that I ate. The team at Bright Farms existed before I got to it. They were a greenhouse consultancy, and when I got to them and met them in 2009, it was on a personal basis. They were cool guys doing cool work. I thought maybe I'd become an investor or an advisor. Didn't know that I'd be finding them what I now know is my calling and my future career that got me here. There was a particular event in 2009 that was sort of a pivotal one for me, which is that I was enjoying getting to know these guys. They were building greenhouses for schools and real estate developers, and I thought they should focus on supermarkets. I called a friend of mine, I called him a favorite guy who ran a New York-based grocery company, and I said, would you entertain a pitch from these sort of crazy guys that build rooftop greenhouses? And they said yes. I wasn't sure they would. And I took an afternoon off from work. I was still running my last company. Went in on this pitch and listened to the Bright Farms guys say, we want to build for you a greenhouse farm that will be exclusive to you, that will get you 0 food mile produce, that's going to be better for your customers. The reaction of the supermarket company is what really changed the direction of my career. They said sort of 3 things. One, we'd really like to have this. We don't like the produce supply chain. It's not good for us, not good for our customers. We love the idea of fresh produce that's local and unique to us. But 2, we don't want to hire local firms to do this. In fact, we won't. We say no to your pitch. And the third was, we can't possibly be farmers or own a farm or manage farms. And that's the perspective that I think all supermarkets and retailers generally still have. And the final thing they said was, and we also can't finance this. We have a lot of revenue as a supermarket company, but we don't have a ton of profits and we don't have a strong balance sheet. We just can't finance projects like this. And of course, I was encouraged by that. And what I realized was that these guys at Bright Farms at the time had the wrong business model. And I had been lucky to get to know the people that had founded and built a company called Sun Edison. People familiar with Sun Edison? Just quick show of hands. Almost nobody. I'll give a 30-second description of that. 10 years ago or 12 years ago, rooftop solar wasn't that exciting. It was a little bit of a stagnant industry. And the reason is that the owners of buildings didn't want long paybacks for the upfront capital investments. It just wasn't really what the business model was. The Sun Edison founders, who went out and became investors in my company, realized that what they needed to do was sell the electricity instead of the capital. So they went to buildings and said, if you agree to buy electricity with fixed prices for the long term, buying a contract, we'll use those contracts to raise project capital. We'll finance, build, and operate these solar panel systems for you on your behalf, and you get fixed prices for 20 years. That turned out to be a great value proposition for buildings and tenants. They love the idea of fixed price electricity. They love the idea of having solar. It took away all the bad stuff and nothing but the good stuff. That immediately created what became a very short period, a multi-billion-dollar industry. I think Sonedison got to $500 million in sales reasonably quickly. And my insight was, could I apply this business model to the supermarket industry with produce? Which was, of course, a crazy idea at the time. Still been a crazy idea. I fell in love with the idea. I started modeling it on Sunday mornings, and I gave the idea to the teams at Bright Farms. I figured ideas are cheap, as they are, it's hard work to count, but I also liked them. I wanted them to succeed, and maybe I'd have some involvement. They basically said, wow, that's a good idea, we think. We don't really know, but it seems like a good idea, but we can't do that. We're science guys, we're almost doing this on a hobby basis, not a commercial scale basis. We just can't imagine we do on our own. And that understanding, and me falling in love with the idea, became the basis for me essentially quitting my old job, which I've been at for nearly 10 years, and thought I would do that for longer, and throwing myself into Bright Farms as its CEO. At the time, my wife was unsupportive. She thought she married an enterprise software CEO. And when I said I was going to build greenhouses for supermarkets, she thought that it sucked. I mean, she thought I was crazy. But she since come around and become our greatest supporter. Now she gets to eat the produce and enjoy what we've made of it. But let me talk about now in the industry in general. Why does this make sense to replace an existing supply chain with one that's different? And different is always hard. Some people argue that our current food supply chain is great. Certainly, it's efficient, but it's also inefficient at the same time. Our food supply chain is efficient, and that creates enormous amounts of food at low cost everywhere. I'm talking about the United States. But here's where it's inefficient. Our fresh produce holds up to transportation great, but it doesn't hold up to taste at all. In fact, the produce most of us get at supermarkets today is built for travel. It's not built for taste. And the centralization of the food system has become a system that breeds foodborne illness, and in my opinion, it's killing the environment. Our supermarket produce supply chain, which is centralized and industrialized, is a huge consumer of land, water, and fossil fuels, and it emits a disproportionate amount of greenhouse gases. With all good intentions to feed the world, parts of our food system aren't just inefficient, in my opinion, it's toxic. Modern supermarket tomatoes, I like these as an example, because they almost always taste bad. Who, other than Californians, loves their supermarket tomatoes? Raise your hand. Even Californians aren't at a very high rate. Even VPs of produce at supermarkets don't raise their hands when I ask that question. So why are they lacking in taste? And nutrition too, by the way. There's two wrong with Eric often. And what does that tell us about the supermarket produce that I'm feeding my family? The problem is the supply chain. Tomatoes are really coming from three places in this country at supermarket scale. They're often international travelers. In the summer, supermarket tomatoes are bouncing in the back of 53-foot trucks from Ontario, Canada, throughout North America, including Texas. In the winter, they're traveling in 53-foot trucks all the way to Mexico, throughout North America, including Ontario, Canada. Nearly 100% of U.S. supermarket lettuces come from just two places. They trade off. Yuma, Arizona in the winter, and Salinas, California in the summer. Now, I've come to the belief that our current food system is failing us. It's become increasingly worse for the environment, for our health. In my opinion, it's contributed to this country's budget deficit. It's squandered our water supply, where we can least afford to squander it. It's polluted our oceans and rivers, and it's sickened our families. And I want to go a little bit deeper on a couple of those factors. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention at the U.S. estimates right now that 36% of U.S. adults were obese in the 2010 research project they did, up from an estimated 15% in 1980. So in 20 years, it went from 15 to 36%. And I'm not talking overweight. There's a lot of that in pregnant obesity, which is a much more severe and dangerous thing to have, sickness. The USDA says that 12.5 million kids in the U.S. between 2 and 9 years old are not overweight but obese. 12.5 million. And I'm not a doctor, I don't want to say the obvious here. One of the primary advisors for overweightness is, of course, unhealthy diets. And the CDC estimates that only 25% of U.S. adults and even fewer adolescents eat the recommended 5 or more servings of fruits or vegetables each day. This problem has become so bad that U.S. military leaders say that the obesity rate is now a national security threat. They don't have a big enough pool of Americans of the right age to recruit from that aren't, their words, not mine, too fat to fight. That's a phrase now that the U.S. military brass is using to describe the national security threat of obesity in this country. Water scarcity is at least as scary, I think, as that. You can't miss the story here in Las Vegas. This is a place in trouble when it comes to water. 90% of this area's water comes from Lake Mead, which I believe, I'm not sure, I think it's created by a dam in the Colorado River. It's created by a man-made lake. That water level has been plummeting in recent years. You can see the bathtub rings when you fly in to Las Vegas, where the water mark used to be and where it is now. The water is about to go below one of the 2 intake pipes that gets water to Las Vegas. They're scrambling to build a 3rd pipe so Las Vegas doesn't run out of water anytime soon. That water, after it's done with Lake Mead, parts that get siphoned off to Las Vegas, goes west. It goes to California. That same source of water, it's like snow melt in the Rockies, is used for agriculture, where lettuce and broccoli and other produce items are being grown. Right now, there's an extraordinary drought going on in California. You all know that, I'm sure. Farms are being shut out because cities give priority. Fields are laying fallow. So while demand for healthy produce like lettuce and broccoli should be and is on its way up, the ability to produce traditional producers is becoming much more difficult and much more expensive, making healthy foods less accessible. That's the bad news. I'm an optimist, though, and I feel very good about where we are right now, because the food system, believe it or not, is at an inflection point in getting better. And I want you to all think about what your roles are in it getting better. While these negative consequences continue to pose a grave threat to our society, there are a number of factors already causing the food system to improve. The short list of these factors: consumer demand, the food industry's reaction to shifting consumer demand, the response of companies and governments to spiraling healthcare costs and budget crises, the activism of government officials and nonprofit organization advocates, and an ongoing trend toward shorter and simpler supply chain. It is phenomenal news that the food system is finally in an improvement trend after decades of worsening. It wasn't something I would have predicted in 2010 when I made my move into this industry. I feel very lucky that the timing has worked out like this. It's even better news that these factors I just listed are increasing in their intensity, and therefore I believe will be increasing the rate of change going forward. And I want to dig into a couple of these in more depth. Let's start with the consumer's desire to be healthy as a factor of improving the food system. As I mentioned, our nation is facing a health crisis. U.S. consumers did not understand the connection between, well, what's the phrase that kids say, you are what you eat? Kids said that, but Americans didn't live with that phrase in mind. Luckily, they're increasingly understanding the connection between nutritious foods and improved health, and vice versa, and therefore the demand for nutritious and whole foods is increasing. I assume that everybody sees that in their purchasing and eating habits. Who here feels like they eat more healthy than they did 5 years ago? Who feels like they eat less healthy than they did 5 years ago? Liars. Someone out there does that. So, I'm eating less healthy than I did 3 months ago, but I'll bounce back soon. That's an extraordinary rate, though, that you guys just showed by your show of hands. As the realities of poor health are becoming apparent, people are starting to feel better and understand the connection between eating and feeling better. The demand for processed foods and artificial ingredients is diminishing. The demand for products that we might be involved with is increasing. A USDA study recently showed that Americans are, for the first time in my lifetime, consuming fewer calories in cutting back on fast food. Consumers vote with their dollars, for sure. So shifting purchases to more healthy food will certainly create more healthy food options. And there have been recently some data published that shows that the rate of obesity among children has flattened out for the first time in decades as well. And that's about the best news I've heard in a long time. Diet trends are becoming lifestyle changes. Terms like flexitarian, semi-vegetarian, or even the Mediterranean diet represent more holistic approaches to improving diet quality. And consumers are starting to focus on long-term sustainable changes to the diet that includes more nutritious foods like fresh vegetables. Whether eating out, shopping at the grocery store, or cooking for family and friends, there's now clearly an improvement trend in the way people are viewing their relationship to food, and it will drive huge demand for the produce that we grow. Food businesses, of course, are the business of selling food. The food industry is a big one. And the food industry analysts have recognized this important shift, and food companies are moving remarkably quickly toward this demand shift. Portion sizes and ingredients for restaurants have really deteriorated from the perspective of public health since I was a baby in the early 1970s. Supermarket food options have also gone downhill over the same time. But now supermarkets and restaurants are demanding healthier and more sustainable products from their suppliers in response to this changing demand. In addition, the capital markets, we have some investors here, and I assume that they're interested in these same trends. Capital markets are looking for businesses that are able to capitalize on these shifting demand trends. Famously, in my opinion, wonderfully, Twinkie went out of business last year. There were all sorts of reasons, but I don't care. Twinkie went out of business last year. They filed for bankruptcy. Whereas companies that have healthy food at the core of their mission, and I'll use a big one we all know, like Chipotle, are thriving right now. Chipotle's revenue increased 17% in 2013. The influence of consumers' healthier choices is clearly confirmed by watching the growth of healthier food companies. And importantly, prominent Silicon Valley angel investors, venture capital firms, and other sources of institutional capital are flowing into the companies they believe will benefit from the shift toward healthier, more sustainable food options. Some of the restaurant chains that have raised a lot of capital to scale nationwide that you've either heard of or will heard of include companies like Native Foods, and Native Foods in San Diego, Chicago. Life Kitchen, we started in Colorado in one of their stores. They're looking to build 250 stores right now, founded by a former McDonald's executive who saw the light about delivering healthy food on a pleasant but also quick service basis to Americans. We've raised capital from an angel investor like Ali Partovi, who's been an angel in technology companies, Facebook, and Dropbox, and OPower, and here in Las Vegas, Zappos. He decided to shift all of his angel investments into healthy food companies, including mine, but including Hampton Creek and others. It's sort of a remarkable thing for a guy like him to do that angels in Silicon Valley follow. And there's a bunch of controlled environment agricultural companies.
The mic isn't working.
The mic isn't working. This one? Check. Is it better? Appreciate it. Check. There are a number of controlled environment agriculture companies that several years ago had not had luck raising a significant amount of capital. Now lots of them have. A non-exclusive list. Would you like me to use this one instead? The next contestant. Companies like Lufa, Botponics, Farm Here, Gotham Greens, Wright Farms, and many others have raised multiples of millions of dollars now. See, I'm getting feedback. Can someone turn this off? Check. Okay, I'm good. We're going to move on to the next one. That one wasn't good for my opinion. Responses to the crushing healthcare costs in America are also, believe it or not, directly improving our food system. Our federal government's budget crisis, I believe, is directly linked to this country's health crisis, which is directly caused by this country's rate of eating. According to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, overall obesity-related health spending in 2009 reached about $150 billion, double what it was only 10 years earlier. Officials navigating the health crisis are adopting policies across the U.S. to improve how people eat, not because they care about eating, but because they want to reduce healthcare spending. States, counties, and cities are huge payers of healthcare as well. They're taking steps. In addition, companies, Facebook is one example that's been very aggressive in this, are taking steps to change the behavior of their employee base, how they live their lifestyles and what they eat, to save the companies money on healthcare costs and improve its profitability. This is, I believe, a win-win situation. These market forces are just beginning to be understood, in my opinion, will dramatically intensify and dramatically drive improvements in the food system. Governments and nonprofit activists are also accelerating improvements in the food system. Government policy for decades has incentivized less healthy eating. The subsidization of corn and soy is, I think, the greatest and worst example of that, and I think it's directly contributed to our country's poor health and poor environment. You agree? So go ahead, let it out. Recently, and the federal government is a slow organization to move, but there's some of you here as well, U.S. government employees, you guys are working to change these things, right? We're going to check that out next year. Give them 10 years. Recently, we've seen many examples of food policy following the lead of public institutions, schools, universities, and activists to set an example and drive policy. It's hard to think of examples of the U.S. making our diet healthier, but believe it or not, there are very clear examples. The USDA just recently took steps to ban trans fats, for example. It doesn't strike me as a bleeding edge innovation, but for the U.S. government to do it will directly lead to less heart attacks and save lives. A big deal, and I hope that sort of an example is replicated many times over. There's lots of local policymakers setting examples. Calorie counts posted on menus, banning sodas, an effort that failed recently in New York, but will succeed in other places. Those sorts of efforts will continue to make an incremental and cumulative improvement. In addition, there's been grassroots consumer activism that's been really effective at driving the behavior changes in large companies. Anybody heard of an activist, a woman who goes by the name of the Food Babe? Raise your hand if you know who she is. Just a handful of you. Google the Food Babe, and even if you don't, you'll hear of her soon. She's just driving activists to gather on social media to change the behavior of big food companies. She got Cheerios to drop GMOs, I think. She's getting she got Kraft to drop an additive to the macaroni and cheese, a food coloring that was a carcinogen. She's single-handedly causing $100 billion a year companies to change their behavior, and that sort of thing can start happening as well. The movie Fed Up just came out. I haven't seen it yet. That will also make a big difference. Finally, the last example I'm going to describe is the trend towards shorter supply chains is improving the food system. Farm to table is a word I hadn't heard of probably as recently as 5 or 6 years ago. It's now something I'm sure you've all heard of. It's a powerful trend, but it's now going a step further. Farm to home kitchen, as distribution methods have changed the supply chain to support the connection between small-scale farmers and consumers. There are a string of companies sprouting up that are all about eliminating the middleman between the buyers and consumers of food and the producers. If you haven't heard of them, look at companies like Farmigo, spelled like Farm, H-E-O, or Blue Apron. And there's plenty of companies raising a ton of capital to shorten the supply chain even further. This is a great time to be in the controlled environment agriculture space. Demand is skyrocketing, and there's 3 really big reasons that I want to tell you about. One is healthier food. The second is the supermarket desire for more controlled environment production, and the third is local produce. I won't speak of healthier food again, we've already talked about that, but I want to point out that the 2 other drivers are specifically changing demand for products that we might be growing. Rabobank is one of the biggest global agricultural lenders. It recently put out a report that showed that retailers want more food created in greenhouses or other controlled environments for these reasons. Better quality, better reliability, better food safety. Retailers won't say it out loud, but they're afraid of field agriculture. Most food safety recalls are coming from field-grown produce. flavor, retailers perceive as better controlled environment, I believe it, and sustainability. This has already worked in tomatoes. In the mid-2000s, 35% of supermarket tomatoes were in controlled agriculture, controlled environment agriculture. It's now at 70%, and that trend is starting to move to other produce items as well, like lettuce, where we're operating. This shift is to your advantage. And then finally, local food is very hot. Another Rabobank research report showed that local seems like it's going to be for the next 5 years what organic was for the last 10 years. And there's been a ton of research from the National Grocers Association, the National Restaurant Association, the Produce Marketing Association, that shows that local is the strongest demand shift in food right now. Supermarkets on their own aren't going to make this happen. Existing small farms around the country generally don't have the wherewithal to create year-round commercial scale produce. And the large traditional suppliers aren't going to pivot quickly enough to react to the opportunities created by those three factors. So let me sum this up for you. Demand is skyrocketing for healthier food, controlled environment food, and local produce. This is a great time in history for growing vegetables and for growing in ways that the people in this room are growing. I won't spend much time about what Bright Farms is up to, except to show you one photo. This is a prototype greenhouse in Pennsylvania. It's about 56,000 square feet. It's growing produce at the rate of about $2 million a year in revenue run rate. It's mostly greens, basil, watercress, lettuces, arugula, kale. It is dramatically more efficient, as you can imagine, in field production. We are next building a project about twice the size in Washington, D.C. That's me with the mayor and his senior staff at a recent press conference. We just closed another financing, since the one mentioned in the introduction earlier. We've raised about $10 million in equity now, about twice that in project finance. And these financings are enabling the company to respond to strong demand for local produce. I want to wrap this up by saying that there are huge problems in this country with our food system. These problems create huge opportunities to respond to this change in demand. I think in many ways you guys are the solution. You're also the ones that can benefit the most from solving these problems. The way that Bright Farms is doing it is certainly not the only way that it can be done, but we are doing it in a way that I believe does scale to meet the supermarkets and to do so profitably, which is required to raise a lot of capital. As for me, I start with my personal story. I'm working hard. I feel like I'm following my calling and having fun. When I left my job at the software company in 2010, it was to fulfill a vision of a world where my daughter Amelia, who loves our backyard garden, would love eating vegetables from the supermarket as much as she does from our garden, and where we didn't have to worry about the source of the food. I want to trust the source of my food. I had a vision of locally grown produce available in supermarkets year-round. I had a vision for what Bright Farms is becoming right now, a vision for growing produce for taste and not for profit. Thank you very much. Can we do some quick questions? Two roving microphones. Just raise your hand if you have a good question. You, sir, are first. Right behind you.
Excellent presentation. Enjoyed everything you had to say. You mentioned briefly the increase in demand of local food, which I think everybody sees. And I believe it's correct to say that you guys grow hydroponic products that are not organic certified. So I was hoping that you maybe would share what it's like demand-wise from the grocery stores to have a local product that's not organic certified. What does that mean to them? Do they care about organic? Is local replacing organic? What's your thoughts there?
Great question. One that we think about a lot, and I've thought about a lot with our investors, actually. I won't speak about why we're not organic today. And there's a couple people here. I think Pierre Asainas, are you here? Not here? Circle Fresh is here. I just spoke to someone earlier. Yeah. So maybe talk to these guys who've done some hydroponic organic production. I won't talk about that. I will talk about the fact that we are now selling convenient salads in about 180 stores in Metro New York, New Jersey, and Metro Philadelphia. A&P is the biggest supermarket chain around New York. And we're selling at the same price point as Earthbound Farm organic convenience salads, and we're slotted in the same part of the produce department. For reasons that I don't completely understand, but I've paid money to do some research on. I don't get it, but I see it. Consumers react to local food in much the same way they react to organic food. I think perhaps the trust in organic certification has declined, and the demand drive for local has offset it or taken its place. It has not proved to be a problem for us. If I had to bet in Las Vegas, I would probably say that in 5 years I will be organic certified, but it's not on my top 5 priorities for the next 5 years. You, sir, is there a microphone right behind you? If you stand up and look behind you.
Thanks. Could you address somewhat how this movement is happening outside the United States, globally?
Wow, difficult question. The world is not homogeneous, right? So we get a lot of inquiries from other countries. I tend to not respond to them. I'm just heads down focused on the U.S. It's a big market. I will say this though: there are demand trends and market trends in other countries that are at least as big and important as the one that we have, but they're different. So in the U.S., it's this long and complex supply chain that I think causes the problems I talked about earlier, as well as the way people eat. The way people eat is similar in some other countries, but in let's say some of the BRIC countries, like some of the biggest economies in the world are like India and China, where we get a ton of inquiries about wanting to have us go there. Much different reasons there. And I think if Wright Farms or someone doing what we do succeeds in China, it won't be to shorten the supply chain. The infrastructure probably isn't that good anyway for long distance supply. It's because of food safety concerns. I don't trust the source of food in most supermarkets in this country today, but the people in China, they don't trust anything. And I think that it's the tainted milk, all those problems will cause people to want to buy producer, seller, nothing in between food, and that's going to drive these changes in those countries as well. Unless you have problems where things like acute water shortages or contaminated soil are so acute that it drives it as well. One or two more? One more, let's make it a good one. Sir? There's a microphone right behind you there, coming its way. We'll do each of these last two quickly. We'll make them quick questions.
Just wanted to ask your comment on the technology, because I think the technology is really the driver. Because with the technology, we can get the price point down to the level of where the other things now matter. If it's not there, then it's hard to make the other things matter. You know, the taste and all those things, if the price point's too high. But the technology gets us down there.
Yeah.
And I spent 25 years in Mexico. That was my first career, basically. And they can't get a tomato up here for 10 days. It has to take 10 days green. And we can compete on local with Mexico because they're not here.
Right.
Local is the ballgame.
Yeah.
I agree with you. If you could just address on the technology.
Yeah. So certainly local creates a fundamental structural challenge to centralized producers and even economies like Mexico. Local is based on geography. They can't fake it in Mexico, right? So when we come, why is technology important based on what the question was, which was totally on the money? Technology will determine what your yields are and what your operating expenses are. Of course, the way you operate the technology will as well. We've grown tomatoes on slabs. We've grown greens in NFT systems. We've grown greens in deep flow pond wrap. I don't want to make any blanket generalizations. I think the technology has to be based on the scale of the project, but also on the products being grown, essentially. I think one mistake that's made in this country is that people are basing their decisions on what technologies to implement based on what will just drive the highest yields without thinking about the volumes of demand for those products and the pricing for those products. But I would encourage everyone to think bigger scale than you are now. I'd encourage you to think about a particular niche of a market that needs what you want now. Big market, lots of niches, and find experts. You sound like you might be one that can help you select the right technologies. We've, like any most startup operations, we've stumbled around a bit with different technologies. We are right now very happy with floating boards on deep flow ponds and using European automation technology for seeding, harvesting, and cleaning the boards. And the last question, who's right over here? He's going to ask me afterwards. Everyone, I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.